6 months ago or so, or 7 months ago, we went with Page Two Publishing, which is a publisher in our fine country of Canada, out of Vancouver, and they've been awesome to work with. And they came back to us, and the original title was "The Jackass Whisperer: How to Deal with the Worst People at Work, at Home, and Online," and that was it. And in the book, it was slowly revealed to you that you, my friend, are the actual jackass in most of these situations. But they came back and said the sales teams and stuff has suggested actually adding "even when the jackass is you," because it actually explains, because the book's about empathy. The book is really about putting yourself in other people's shoes. And I'm like, no, we are not changing the subtitle, because that's the joke. You're going to get in there and say, yeah, I'm surrounded by jackasses. And by the end, you're like, maybe not. But then I realized people would never have picked it up in the first place. And the people we actually want to have the book is for the people who just want to have a little bit better day. And this, the book isn't about not standing up for things or being passive in things. And I do not go quietly anywhere. And I stand up, and Alison stands up, and we are very strong when we fight for things. It's about letting the small things go, so we do have the energy and the strength to stand up for things, and also but to give our emotions to the people that deserve us, the people that we love and that we cherish, versus the rando that cut you off driving somewhere, and then they consume your mind for the next 20 minutes to 20 hours, depending on what happens.
Right, or the ones who get into line in front of you and they have more than their allotted items per.
You just triggered me. Don't do that. It's just.
I'm so sorry.
It's a very simple process. 12 items or less.
I know.
But here's the question, because this is a debate. If I have 5 of the same item, does that count as 5 items or 1 item?
It counts as 5 items. I'm pretty sure.
If they have to scan it, it's an item.
Yes.
I think too, like when Scott talked about being like in front of audiences, right? Because Scott's a speaker, so it's kind of fun to play around with something. So he had asked, one of Scott's biggest pet peeves is anyone who irritates him while he's driving. So you ask an audience, right, who hates, jackass drivers, like who cut you off and who hog lanes and blah, blah, blah. And almost every single person in a room will put up their hand. But then when you go back and say, okay, so how many of you have been jackass drivers? All of a sudden, like there might be 1 person. So we all do these things. Like I've gotten in the line with more than 12 items, and so have you. But it's about I haven't. But it's about saying like, okay, but maybe, just maybe, instead of getting irritated and it's contagious, right? So then taking our own irritation and spreading it to the next 10 people we meet, maybe this isn't the, hill we need to die on today. And I think too, when you're starting off with, people don't necessarily like to be like you. Like if we wrote a book like You're a Jackass, I don't think anyone would want it. But when you turn it around and you can be really self-deprecating about it, there's a reason The Vegetarian is a Jackass is the first jackass in the book, and I'm a vegetarian, because you start off by saying like, no, we're jackasses.
We are the royal couple of jackassery here.
But we also want to recognize that maybe there's another way to do things. And so that kind of opens it up. And then people are much more willing to take the message in if I'm like, no, I'm raising my hand as the first jackass.
I don't think anybody in their DNA is a jackass. I think we're all capable of being situationally a jackass, right?
That's the face. We need a screenshot of the face.
For the most part, I don't think that anybody is at their core a jackass. We are just in situations. And as an example, let's say you have a member and they email or they tweet or they call, or it's at an association event, and they're angry about something, and what they're trying to say is, I have not been heard, or my expectations have not been met. Yet in our brain, as a defense mechanism, we're like, well, such a jackass. I'm sure that people have said along the way, I'm not saying anybody listening or watching now has, but you're like, if it wasn't for the members, it'd be so much easier to be, to do as an association, to run an association. If it wasn't for these humans, this stuff would go so much more smoothly. The lunch would be quicker at an event, the dues would be processed immediately, and all of these side of it is we're situationally jackasses. So we have to flip it, and we have to start looking at people's intent, and that's the biggest thing. We forget about intent. We'll go back to driving, because most of us can relate to that type of thing. When somebody cuts you off, we just think they did it on purpose, or they're an idiot, or they don't know how to drive. And some of us, actually catch up to the person just to give them the look. You
From
know,
the look, like
right?
we
The
know
look.
what's going on here.
Yeah, yeah. Hello,
Really?
I'm just saying you just did that, and we're just trying to say I'm mad. You know
I
what I mean? I'm
see
like
you.
it's that and then when we see them, whatever we see, we then throw that into the bucket of our bias. So we're just like, they're young or they're old or they're a woman or they're a man or they're white or they're black or they're whatever it is, and like that's why you did that. And we just paint them with a brush that says, your entire universe is now a jackass. When in reality, most of the time, they didn't see us.
Right.
That's
right.
it. And when we do it, right, when we cut them off, we give.
Have you ever done? And that's the thing. When you
All the
find
time.
yourself doing it, don't you hate
I
yourself a little bit?
literally 2 days ago, I'm in Toronto. I'm in the city, and people, one of the worst things, especially especially the big cities, where when it's a rush hour, people entering an intersection before they can leave the intersection, so they block the intersection. It's a big deal. I don't think anybody enjoys that. When you look at a list of pet peeves, some are subjective, but I don't think anybody's like, "Woo, somebody's blocking traffic. I'm so good for that." So when we see that, so I was sitting there and I'm looking at them all, and of course I'm in my head, I'm like, bunch of morons. I'm yelling in my car to nobody. I'm yelling in my car, don't enter the intersection until you can leave, and nobody can hear me. It's my bubble of jackassery. And then finally I get my green light because I'm turning left, and I'm like, finally, and I pull in and I'm stopped right in the middle of the intersection because all the cars that I anticipated would go turn in were blocked. So then I was the jackass, and I could see other people in their cars, in their silent bubbles, going like this.
And they're slowing down to give you the look, and they're
giving me the look that I just gave out, and I'm just like, hello, hello, hello. And that's what I realized. You can't look. We're all going to be jackasses driving. We're all going to be jackasses flying one way or the other. But I'm so quick on a plane. Like I live on planes, and this year I did 60 conferences, and I'm always on planes. And like I'm doing a count how many bags of backpacks hit me in the face as they walk by because I'm in an aisle seat. When in reality, what can I control? I have my noise canceling headphones. I open up my iPad and I can just focus on that instead of looking for the jackassery. Because if you're going to go looking, you'll find it every day, everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing to remember, is that it's so easy to become the jackass without even when you think you've accounted for everything. You're going through and you're not taking up too much time through TSA or you're clear, you're doing all the stuff you're supposed to do. And then you run into somebody that you didn't know was there. Your backpack smacks somebody in the face. Scott in the face.
Yeah, and it's giving everybody, it's just cutting everybody some slack. And at the end of the day, the first person that we need to cut slack to is ourselves.
Yeah.
Like we're really hard on ourselves in general. I have found, and I have learned that we are at a point that, we have such high expectations for ourselves, and we have so low esteem for it. Like it's something, it's the endless pursuit of more sometimes we have, where we're always trying to get the next thing or do the next thing versus sometimes looking around and seeing what we got, and we appreciate it. And that can be on the road, that can be at home, that can be at work. And it's all those facets of it where if you're not cutting yourself some slack, we're never going to cut other people some as well. And that builds up. And it's a hard thing to deal with unless we say, you know what, we're all human, and nobody's perfect. And
True.
Some of us can be more of a donkey than others.
Well, so for those of you, this is a point when I want to remind those who are actually participating in this live. And I was a jackass. I didn't start recording. I paused it until a little bit into it. So, but if you want to ask your questions, I know that most of you are on mute right now, but you are able to unmute yourselves, and you can type into the side, and we can bring you in along the way if you type into the side that you want to ask a question, okay? Because I don't want to linger too long when there are so many other things that we can ask while we have Scott and Alison on here. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, which is a little bit it is unrelated to the book itself, but it's something that both of you deal with. And that is, you have co-written books together that are seemingly of a different sort of theme. It's a different kind of thing, different kind of project. And yet your brand is sort of focused around, it's been UnMarketing. You've got on your podcast, your focus there. And so how are these things connected, and how is it working together as you're sort of navigating how to tie these things together so that you're continuing to get booked, you're continuing to make business happen?
I don't think that we're necessarily like actively looking for threads to tie things together. It's more about that because the brand is really Scott's voice, which over the years became our voice, which became so there. All of the content that we make, whether it's from Scott being on stage to a book, it all comes from the same place. So our process is that we are constantly researching and have people send things to us, which is fantastic. So we're constantly, stories, right? We're always consuming, and then we share them with each other. And then kind of the best of those when they're related, mostly related to business, but consumer advocacy or, and it ended up being a lot of jackasses in business necessarily. And then that stuff will end up on the podcast. And then the very, very best of a podcast will end up in a book. And then the very best of a book ends up on stage. So even though there's some different iterations, like we have the UnTrilogy, right? UnMarketing and UnBranding and UnSelling. And now this is a bit of a departure in that we're kind of saying like, and it was a little challenging when writing it not to be so focused on business. I think the business and the online jackasses were written in about 8 seconds. And then it was like, okay, so now let's talk about some life stuff, and because we're always talking about things, that wasn't a problem. But I think that's why you see kind of the same voice. Like even though UnBranding, let's say, is a business book and, we're looking at brands, if you read it, it's not going to read very differently than Jackass is. It's still kind of that voice. And I think that's why everything kind of goes together. So it's more about that it all comes from the same place. So it all ends up being kind of under one brand. Jackass is a bit of a departure for us, but it had just been, kicking at us for so long, wanting to do it, and the popularity of the phrase and everything that we're like, we'll give it a whirl. And see how it goes.
Well, the funny thing is, again, I went to page 2, which is how all these stories start, where I went to page 2, the publisher, and I'm like, just so you know, there's not going to be a talk about Jackass Whisperer. There's not going to be, it's just a book for fun. And this is our 6th book. Like we're allowed to play in the playground a bit and do these type of things. And then as it was going along the process, I'm like, hang on, every single talk out of the 500 plus keynotes I've done have been about jackassery. Like they're all about that. They're all about either how to recover from something going wrong or something that just went wrong, or that we're realizing what can we do about it. And they realized, no, there is a talk. And so it's the same, because it's always in our voice, and the talk becomes it. So now this is like the first time like I've put out a new talk for events, but it's because then people are like, well, you gotta be careful because the branding is this. And I'm like, I'm good with the brand. We're pretty solid with the thing. And we're wonderful with it. So we got, UnMarketing for marketers, UnSelling for salespeople, UnBranding for all people. And then I'm like, but if you want that extra little inspirational kind of perspective type of thing on stuff, and that's where the Jackass comes out, which is funny because it's full circle, because 20 something years ago I started out as the motivational work-life balance speaker, which is hilarious if you know me now. But it's full circle. Like we're going back to that saying what was the concepts then, and I'm like, well, nobody wanted to listen to a 25-year-old work-life balance speaker necessarily, but 44-year-old, oh no, now it's got legit. Now it's legit. Now he's a little more bitter. Now he's a little more weathered. So.
And for us, like we've never wanted to do something just because we had to do it. Like even with all of the business books, it was never like, okay, so next year we have to release a book because we have to do this or we have to do that. That's never the way we've created anything. It's always been some idea that one of us can't shake. And then it's like, we have to do this. And I think Jackass has just been kind of hanging around for a long time. And the speaking, we've been very lucky. And Scott is very gifted, as you know, because you've seen him, a very talented speaker. And so it's sort of like we can do something fun. Like we only released UnBranding like 2 years.
Listen, 2
so
years
that's not
ago,
that long ago to have your last, business book come out. And we're always creating content and doing things online. So we just wanted to. I don't know how else to say it. We just wanted to write it. And
doesn't it feel good to say that?
It's been an adventure. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it does feel good to say that though, right? Where you just this is what we wanted to do, and this is the division of labor in our relationship is very unique. That Alison writes the books, I do the stuff on stage, and together we come up with the ideas and we talk, and people are like, I don't what do you mean? And I'm like, no, it's very simple. It's how we work together and live together and have our lives together. I don't tell her how to write. She doesn't tell me how to speak.
Oh, I
And we're both
know.
each other's biggest fans in those disciplines and every other discipline too. So it works so well that we can do those things for fun, because when Alison is thinking about, putting the book together and stuff, she's right into it and focused. And I'm just like,
I look forward to reading it.
I'm like, I'm looking forward to reading it when it comes out. And I don't have the focus nor the patience. And that's the funny thing about, looking at relationships of where what strengths are there versus focusing on each other's weaknesses, that, because that can happen in relationships too, where we're each other's biggest cheerleaders in this stuff. So when she's like, I have an idea for a book, I'm like, hell yes. Right. And then when I come up,
and when he says, I think we should make hundreds of stuffed donkeys as promotional items, I'm like, okay, I'll get on the phone to China and make some donkeys.
Which, by the way, my daughter wants to thank you very much. I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. She's like, what goes in the pot? I'm like, I think the book could fit in there. And she's got it. She confiscated it. Yeah. I don't even get to keep it.
Pouches are like the best kid toy ever.
Man.
Like little bags they can put things in. The whole time I'm packing up books, I'm like, no adult is going to get to use the book in this pouch. Like immediately the kids are going to put something in it.
Yeah, it's in her bedroom. It's like she immediately was like, that is mine, and took it. But
we had Donkey Logistics Central here a few weeks ago. The entire basement was just sprouting up donkeys. And but that's the thing is, if you're going to do it, like putting out a book, and it's a lot. Like it's 10,000 titles come out a year just to get through the noise. And we said, look, this is like I said, the 6th book. We're not going to chase lists. We're not even going to do a pre-order campaign. We did nothing.
Yeah, we did nothing.
The day the book launched, we just put it out there, which doesn't happen. And we said, let's do the donkeys. We'll do the socks. We'll do the stickers. Let's just, no matter what, the only thing we can control is what we're doing. So let's have fun, because we can't control sales. We can't control lists. And it's a game that's exhausting. And you can't play a game where the rules change every day. So we said, forget it. Let's just do this our way. Let's have our house be a donkey fulfillment center. Let's put out stock. And this is the thing, like the promotion we did for it cost us twice as much than we'd ever make on a book. Like every package we sent out was about $50.
I wondered about that.
To anybody who bought 5 copies, we'd send a donkey and socks and stickers, and then 10 was 10 pairs. And every time we sold one of those sets, we lost money. And that's the exciting part, because what happens is we did every box we sent out. We're like, I can't wait for them to open it.
It was
right? Because
awesome.
It's like, it spreads it that way. And our investment in the book isn't about, how much we can make per book or anything. It's about, we want to push out a movement here. We want to push out a little bit of smile, a little happiness, a little laughter with people, but also a little bit of just, let's bring it down a bit to say, hey, we're on this earth together. And so we don't mind spending that money towards it.
I took a picture of the process of the unboxing. So I thought, later when I have the interview and I've given everyone a chance in the book club to be a part of this separately. When I share with everybody, I can share like the unboxing, the whole thing, like how amazing this was to go through this process, because it does feel very individual and it feels different. I think I'm looking for the donkey postcard, the Jackass postcard.
It's a little Scott brilliance right there.
Yes,
the donkey postcard.
This was so cool, you guys. I mean, and I thought it was extremely fun, and it felt very personalized and just like you wanted to be part of that.
There was a different card. So because you purchased the books, right, you got the swag card, but Scott made another card, which brings us back to the one of the first things you said when we sat down, which was like this idea, like you're not sure when you give it to someone if they're going to think you're calling them a jackass. And so the card, these were for books we sent to people that hadn't bought books, like just a few people, promotional kind of media, a lot of media and stuff.
Friends of ours.
Yeah. And so the card said like, we're not saying you're a jackass. And that's what the card said inside of it. So we just tried to be fun.
We're not saying you're a jackass. We're just thinking you might like it, but you also could be a jackass.
Yeah. Well,
some of our favorite people are jackasses.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it turns out we all kind of are ourselves, right?
Yeah.
I think that it has been such an amazing ride to see how you've released the other books. This one felt different. It has this different sort of energy around it, and I think it's fun to see people allow themselves to do something that maybe does fly in the face of what you would think is like, here are the rules. This is your brand. You're going to stick with Jackass or whatever
Right. Right.
to continue going on, and to see you going ahead and saying, yeah, you know what? I think it's more true to my brand to just do what we feel feels right. Right.
Which is really what our brand has always been. Like even
Yeah.
on selling and on branding, like it just worked. Like it wasn't a big force.
And we never forced
They
it.
didn't have
Yeah.
another title and we're like, oh wait, we must stick with our,
Yeah.
and I think that's important because I think especially as entrepreneurs, you can get very like, bored isn't the right word, but just because things are, going well doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't take some risks and try some other things, especially with us, like with social media. When we started, the world looked different than it does now. A
Mhm.
million things have
Mhm.
changed. They're going to change this afternoon. They're going to change tomorrow. So it's also, as we change, doing different things also keeps us interested in what we do and keeps us passionate and keeps us excited about what we want to do. And then it's just the way we are. I called Scott, I think yesterday, driving back from the school run saying, I think I got another business book. And he's like, okay, because it's just, that's how we live. Like, that's how we are. It's very like that. Yes. And,
It's always been driven by our own curiosity. And
yeah.
I think that's what drives people, where there people would, ramp up to write a book, and then we work on, and I said, what do we find interesting? What do we find funny? What do we find captivating? And that's always been the driver for everything. Every story I tell on stage, I love the story, and therefore I tell it that way. And I've never done it. It's kind of an odd setup, but I've never kind of said, well, this story might fit for this industry or this. And I'm just like, what story can resonate with
Mhm.
humans? And then we can go drill down deeper into, okay, if this association is to do with shipping containers,
Then
which is
maybe
one
a
I shot at,
container
then is
story
there
or
a little
something,
thing in there? But it was always about, if I find it fascinating, I can tell it in a fascinating way. You can write it in a fascinating way, and it's going to resonate, even all the way down to the original UnMarketing.
Yeah.
Was out of like, there's this stuff resonates with me, and I think it resonates with other people out there, and let's see if it does.
Because one of the traps, right, of being successful, it sounds terrible to say that, but one of the traps is you just try to recreate what you did before. Like when Scott created UnMarketing, it wasn't a thing he was already doing. He had this idea. He was excited by it. So just because it's been working, that doesn't mean that now this can be an idea and maybe we'll try a little bit of this. And so I just think it keeps it interesting and like exciting and fun for us. And for example, I was thinking about this actually. Scott has a really great bit in his talk that's his millennial rant. And then there's a YouTube video. It's been very popular for us. But it wasn't like Scott and I sat down and said, millennials is really a hot topic. I think we need a millennial part in your talk. That wasn't how that happened. What happened was Scott was on stage and we were doing our research and something about millennials was in his head. And he just,
Buffalo. Yeah, I turned to you I was 1 foot on the stage and my intro was being read. And it was just so it was 4 years ago, where everything was like, how do you deal with millennials? How do you retain them? And how do you, and I just turned to Alison. I'm like, I'm going to lose it about this millennial bias. And she's like, go get them, baby. And I went on stage and I just kind of went off on just lumping people into a category based on age. But it was a rant though, first about millennials, which was playing into my hand. And then I flip it on them. But that was just like, you know what, this gets me going. This gets me passionate versus this is what's popular. And we fall in my world of speaking, we sometimes fall victim of that, where people are like, well, what do you speak on? And the answer is, what do you need me to speak on? And that's not exactly an expert stance in something. And I think events hire experts who speak versus just speakers for the most part. And in the speaking world, we kind of fall back on, because we do so many reps, and I that every talk you give, you're just making it better and better and better. Like I've told the Ritz-Carlton Joshi story 300 times to an audience, and every time you're trying to work on it, but it can get to a point where if you don't have stuff that's new or different or interesting,
they're like,
some people might think it's stale. But we run into this problem because I'll talk to somebody who's runs an event for something, for an association, and they're like, oh yeah, we don't need a a social media keynote. And I'm like, I haven't spoken about social media in 6 years, like on stage. So that's, you get labeled sometimes when somebody sees you speak too. So just putting this out there, I relate it to the comedy world and comedians, where some comedians, they work the clubs, the circuit, and up to the end of the year, then they film their special. This is like George Carlin would do this, and then when he'd finish film the special, he'd throw away the material and start again. And there's somebody like Seinfeld who has some jokes in his act that are 30 years old. And he's talked about it, and I realized that I got to give the best talk to a group, to an association, to an event, but sometimes the hook is different. And I realized the Jackass Whisperer can resonate with some people, but some people are like, yeah, we can't have the word jackass at our event. You know, they can be very concerned with it. Except if this book came out 10 years ago, that's one thing, because it would have been saucy. But now they're dropping F-bombs on covers of book now, so we're tame.
A really good thing that also about that, which is interesting about how we create content, is we were actually approached about writing like a sweary kind of a book. And we didn't want to do it. I was particularly against it because I was like, no, it's just because it's popular right now to do a sweary book. To me, wasn't a good enough reason to do a sweary book. And then we had that conversation. We kind of moved forward with it. And then we wrote a sweary book. I was laughing about it the other day. I'm like, but it wasn't because like that's the why of your content is super important, right? The why of your content is where you base yourself, like why you're doing it. Right. And so it wasn't enough. Doing something because it's popular, or even because it's been successful for you in the past, isn't necessarily a good reason to continue doing it. And one of the reasons that all the work is aligned is because the values underneath it are aligned. So if you look back at our work, let's say you look through a lens of like it with associations, like we're very firm believers in community, building communities. We both have been involved with online communities, offline communities. So when you look at something like the Jackass Whisperer and you read through it, this idea of getting along better with other people who are going to irritate us is all about community building. And that is aligned perfectly with all the things we've talked about in UnBranding or Unselling, which were more necessarily about how companies could build communities, but it's still about community building. That ethic is at the basis of what we do. And I think that's why you can read Jackass Whisperer, you can listen to the podcast and read UnMarketing, and it all sounds like the same person.
So you can mark it at 3914. Alison goes into talking about the connection between associations, community, and what they do. I love it, you guys. That is amazing.
Well, it's so important. And it's such an important part of all of our lives, whether it's our work lives, our home lives. Community is so important. And when you look at it with a little bit of a jackass lens, it makes sense that we're all so irritated with each other all the time.
Well, yeah, and that's a big part of too. So we look at, again, it's back to the fundamentals of this jackassery movement we're looking at, which is, okay, so what can we do about stuff? So people are like, well, then how do you deal with, like we did a radio interview a couple days ago, like how do you deal with the person in the theater with the loudest crinkly
chewing
bag or chewing? And I'm like, very simple, don't go outside.
Right.
Like don't go in public. Like that's how you avoid jackassery, is one way. Never leave wherever you are, because once you go, if you chose to go see a movie, you're opening it up to the world, to the public out there. But it's because the problem is people will say, oh, okay, I get it, so how do I fix that person? And I'm like, you don't get it. It's not about fixing. So we look at it. So let's say at work or with a relationship, let's look at sarcasm. Okay, because sarcasm, people don't realize that my English is my second language. Sarcasm is my first. And that's how I built my life, the brand, and everything under that. But sarcasm can really erode relationships. That's really because it's erosion is the word I think is the best one, because it's very slow. It's very because it's just passing comments, and it starts eroding, where you have so Alison, I always go for the joke. I built a career on the funny guy. I my report card written in grade 3 was, that back in the day, they'd handwrite it and they could say whatever they want on report cards. And I said, I'm the class clown, and now I just made it profitable. So I've been rewarded for sarcasm my whole life. Okay, I've been rewarded for it. And when Alison and I got together, I'm just like, I'm gonna go for the joke, and I teased her, and she just looks at me and goes, I don't like to be teased. And it's like, all right, done. And I haven't teased her since. And the problem is our base, so our foundation of our relationship isn't built on sarcasm, because when she's never.
Even though we are decidedly two of the most sarcastic people that
the most
we know, for sure.
That was it. But then here's the thing. I haven't removed sarcasm from our lives. We are
Right.
just not pointed at each other. And that's the
Right.
thing, is where you direct it. So if it's for a coworker and you communicate through sarcasm,
Mm-hmm.
and point it at each other, and people do it with their friends, do this, and they take a shot at them. But it's so weird when that's the basis of somebody's relationship. The point of that working relationship, personal relationship, is when you are together, you are better than when you are apart. And if
Mm.
that's not the case, then we
Mhm.
have to look at why. And that the day-to-day, just the slight slow erosion of things is where, when you see somebody like, oh, I can't deal with them today. You know what I mean? That type of reaction with
Right.
somebody.
Right.
And somebody might have that with you.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at what we're doing in that situation.
I think too that there's like when you're looking at an association, there's this idea, like Scott and I can be very outspoken about certain things. We're people who will, boycott a brand because they do something. We're people who will cut off a friend, or like that. We can be those people. Like Scott's never met a riot or a coup he didn't love. Like we love that stuff.
Bring on the mutiny.
But what it also creates is this idea that we can only be in a community with people who are either exactly like us or we agree with every single thing that they say. And it's unrealistic. It's impossible to build a community if you need to all be exactly the same. And so it's what the book is also about, is saying like, it's okay that some people irritate you, and it's okay that you irritate some people. That's okay.
Well,
Here's how we can move past it and still be, in a community together, or still sit on a school board together, or still run a family together, or a company together. No one is going to agree with every single thing you do. And everybody is going to irritate you at one point or another. But it's about, figuring out what's more important. Is it more important that we have this community? Yes, I think. And then how do we therefore figure out how can we make the best of all these humans in the same space, whether it's a physical space or an online space? It's still humans with their own needs, their own wants, their own desires, all squished together. And so how can we get past all of these little petty nitpicking kind of things that irritate us to the point where we're actually doing good work together? And a lot of that is about you're giving people the benefit of the intent, but it's also about planning. So let's say conferences, which are big association things. Let's say you find you're going to conferences and you're always people are driving you crazy. You can't deal with it. You're in a hotel. You hate
Jeanette
hotels.
smiling in her little square,
in line for food. You hate being in line. They don't have the kind of, whatever coffee you like. That's driving you bonkers. Maybe, just maybe, some of the problem is you. Like maybe we all need to do a Jackass audit of the things that especially irritate us and figure out our own ways to make our lives better by avoiding them or planning for them.
And one of the things I do on the road, because I live at conferences, and I know the Marriott ballroom better than most of the rooms in my house. And but it's about controlling your variables. You know what sets you off, because the things that set you off set off most people. Mm-hmm. It's about when you're away from home, you're already out of a comfort zone. So I try to control at least the creature comforts. So I've learned, but this is years of Jackass research of me getting angry at hotels for having subpar coffee in the room. Yeah. Like one creamer. What are you, psycho? One creamer?
I know. What is with that? Why would they do that?
Right. And so I'm just like, I would be ranting, and I'm like, I could just bring my own stuff. And so from that point on, I bring a Nescafe instant coffee with a creamer in it and some sugar in it. It's exactly the amount. I can control it. I bring it in a Ziploc. I claim it at customs. I cross a border. I'm like, I'm bringing food in. They're like, what? It's like instant coffee. They're like, you're weird. And I'm like, awesome. And then I go, because I control that variable. And I used to, and here's the thing, I used to wake up at the very last second I could, because, I want my sleep. And I realized, this is like a year ago, I realized it. I've been on the road for 9 years doing events straight like this, and it took me this long. And now I realize if I set my alarm an hour earlier than planning, which 2 years ago would be like, something wrong with you. There's no way I'd do that. But I wake up an hour earlier, and I make my in-room coffee with my packet, and I sit there, and I just pull up my phone, and I just wake up. versus just the
Yeah.
last second type of thing where I would go down. I've never been late for an event in my life. I've never missed a sound check in my life, but I'm realizing I'm just better for the client that way too. I'm less stressed. I'm still not waking up a groggy. And like, you know, when the curtain comes up and stuff, it's go time and I'm ready, but I'm even better when I plan it in my control versus me saying, oh, the elevator's so slow. You know, like the complaint, people like doing the sigh outside of the elevator waiting or something. I'm like, well, if I plan a bit earlier, it's okay if it's slow because I've planned ahead these type of things. So because events, especially, there's so much pressure. And when people are walking around from as part of the association, you know, working the event, they have what we call event face, which is like on the surface, it's happy. One layer on the surface, it's smiling and like, how you doing? And then I can see it. You can see it. It's right
in the eyes.
Yeah, it's in your cornea. You can see it, which is like, I'm going to murder a human right now if another issue gets brought up, because there's so many fires needing to be put out. And I realized, what can I do to make that situation better? Because I was coming off as a jackass because I wasn't looking at intent versus reception, which is something we talk about a bunch, which is, so when I, even like my contract, an association brings me in to speak, they get sent like the rider, you know, what I require when I go. And it's not a lot. I always say I'm a diva. I seem like a diva on stage, but I'm
no
really
green M&Ms or like.
Right. So, but I used to have my thing, it says no podium on stage, and that's all it said. And so for me, I'm like, the reason I don't want a podium on the stage is if it's a small stage, I don't stand behind one, but but I didn't realize it was being received as no podium on stage. And I would come into an event and they'd be like, we're so sorry, there's a podium on stage. We'll see what we can do. And the stage is like 100 feet wide. I'm like, no, we're good. We're good.
Like you couldn't appear at the same time as a podium on stage.
A podium killed my father. And somebody turns around and goes, it's a lectern. And you're just like, oh, forget it. Right. And you're so freaking out about this stuff. And I realized, well, how can it be received? So we changed the wording. Scott would appreciate no podium on stage if it's a small stage, because he doesn't stand behind it. Now that's a little bit different in the delivery. So when you receive it, it's not like, oh, here's another diva.
All caps.
You know,
no lecterns.
No lecterns or podiums. No live Twitter screen. Where I realized if we word it differently, like sending slides in advance. You know, I wouldn't send slides in advance to an event because one event changed a slide on me 7 years ago, and I'm like, that's it. If we can't have anything nice, nobody's having anything. And then, but events, we'd be like, I'm one of 1,000 things. I had to realize this is a big revelation for me.
Try not to laugh.
I'm not that special.
Oh, God.
Right. When I go into an event, though, I realize I'm one of the line items in an event. Right. There's coffee. There's carpet for the trade show. There's Scott Stratten and his podium needs and all these things. And I realize, how am I reducing stress of an event person? How am I reducing that stress? Like, because it's usually reversed for these events. Like I get to be the keynote. This is what I dreamed of doing since I was 12. I'm getting paid to be there, yet I get treated like I'm the guest of honor. Like I get the nice suite at the hotel. They're running around getting me something, and I'm like,
gift,
I'm just like, this is backwards because you're paying me. And I had to realize that in my brain that, you know, I might be the keynote, but I'm just one of the notes in this symphony of an event that is going on. And if I can be easier to work with, that means the whole product is better because the audience sees what's on stage, but you see the before and the after, which really adds up to, this person a headache to work with? Because there's 100 other speakers that can kill it for an event. And I thought last year, Am I one of the best speakers up there? Well, I don't have a lack of confidence in my stage skills. Studies have shown that it goes really well.
I haven't sensed any.
Right. So but am I the easiest to work with? And the answer a year or two ago was probably not, because I was being a jackass by proxy. I was being a jackass, meaning I would send it to my assistant who would send it to Kepler, my bureau in the States, and then they would have to relay the message to the client. So I was playing jackass telephone. I'm like, you tell them.
I'm not a jackass. It's Karen. Or
right. So it's like,
come on, we've all made up an assistant.
Right. But that's the issue, because I had no problem doing it. And then I thought, would I say this directly? And now I realize I will not ask Karen, who's the coordinator of AWesome for UnMarketing for 16 years now,
She's
or
on
Kepler,
top of it.
to say that I would never tell them to do something that I wouldn't directly say to a client. And that's the way we should do it, because it gets into a point where we it almost felt cowardly of me to be able to say, well, you tell them that, even though
It was cowardly of you.
I'm the one who's going to speak, and it was, and exactly that. We have to look at as leaders, that are we asking others to do things that we would not do ourselves? Now, I understand that if you worked your way up, you're a leader of thing. You may not be the one that have
Not
to do
tasks, but like the nature of what you're
the
asking
nature
them
of
to
what
do,
you're
right?
doing and how we do it. And just because we're in a leadership position does not give us license to be a jackass to everybody.
We had so we have 5 kids, and the middle one, who's my eldest, once told me in the morning that I loved him more after I had coffee.
You're so observant, sweetheart.
And he was about 14 at the time. Like, he really meant it. Like, he was just, I was waking up in the morning to get them, and I was grumpy, and I would wake them all up, and then I'd have coffee. And I mean, I could not love these children more than anything. They are my entire world. And then I realized probably the rest of the world loves me a little more after I've had coffee too. Like, probably I'm just a better person after I've had coffee. So
Yeah,
I wake up an hour before them every single morning, and I have coffee. Because when I get to the end of the day, I can look back and feel like, it was a better day and I wasn't miserable. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. If we're well rested and not hungry and caffeinated, we are all nicer to work with. I think that's
so true.
And some of it is that when we talked about like holidays and stuff like that, we had some people sending in ones about like, allergies or all these kinds of things, which can be complicated. We have allergies in our home, but it's also about speaking. Like, we're very quick to like complain about things online without actually addressing them with the person. So it was like, well, have you told your aunt whose house you always go to the last 10 years at the holidays that you like don't eat that? Like, have you had a conversation? They're like, no, I'm just going to complain about it on the internet. And I'm like, think about the things that you're already anticipatorily stressed about, and think about ways that you could make them better for yourself. It goes a really, really long way.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I wonder if some of the complaints that we have aren't these like favorite complaints that we just hold on to. They're like the thematic complaints that we grab, and we're like, you know what? I really like complaining about that particular disgusting dessert made of cottage cheese that is fluorescent pink that my mom always like. I like complaining about. I kind of would miss if it weren't there.
Because we bond on it. We bond on the complaining, right? And
Yeah.
that's, look, hey, Alison and I complain all the time with each other, back and forth about other people and other things. I promise you, we're not asking people to walk around. No, we're looking at you. It's just a bit of perspective. Like, usually when somebody's angry, like maybe at an event, let's say we're running an event, somebody is disproportionately angry about their lanyard or something, which is something that should cause a lot of anger to begin with. But you realize that's actually not the problem.
Right.
Because you've just hit the end, kind of that tipping point of so that your day, whatever's going on in your world, if you believe that everybody has a story and everybody's going through something, then usually on the surface right in front of you, that's not the actual issue. That's the final issue of that day. And that can be different. That can be a member who's going to stop being a member, because it's not like the one thing that happened. It's the buildup. It's not taking care of something, all the way through the process. And so when somebody gets mad, they're actually mad that they traveled to a certain place and a roommate bailed for the event, so they got to absorb the whole cost and the lanyard. Like, you know what I mean? So it builds up, and it's not usually that issue. That's why and then we take it out on people, though, because we think we can. And I really think that the only people out there that are below other people are the ones who think they're above others, honestly. So we take it out on frontline workers, we take it out on servers, we take it out on, and I've learned, and I when I say we, I mean I can get grumpy at, you go to a fast food place or something, you pull in to get your order wrong, screw up somebody's coffee, and oh, sweet fancy Moses, look out. Like, that's days. I remember that for days, so I pull out of a Starbucks and I'm like, this is not 2 raw sugars, this is 1. And you can tell. And then it's like, that'll just set me off for 2 days. And I realized, when I talk to somebody at the front line, I'm learning to do this, is I just look at their name tag and I read it in my mind. I don't say it out loud like Carl. Like, I don't just say their name, but I say it in my head, which then actually
it's a person.
Makes somebody human again, because of realizing it's not Carl's fault or whoever it is that's doing it. And when I read it, it reminds me to treat somebody like a a human as well, because that person usually isn't the cause of your problem, didn't create the policy that made the problem, or they're just freaking human.
Yeah.
And something went wrong, and get over it, diva, Scott.
And I think that within communities that like that love of complaining can be like accelerated a bit and amplified. It's like if I wouldn't probably do this to Scott, but maybe to one of the kids, if I call them in my nice voice and I'm like, come here, no one answers. And then I'm like, sweetheart, can you come and do this? Nobody answers. Well, by the 5th time, I'm screaming at them, which also happens to be the first time they hear me. So to them, I just screamed at them for the first time for no reason. They don't know I've been saying it nicely 10 times. Right. And that's what happens. You feel like you aren't listened to, and then you get together on it. And you're sort of like, none of us are being listened to, you know? And
the pylon happens.
Yeah, and it's like pylon and it gets amplified. And so it's just to kind of take a deep
It's like the person at work when I worked corporately for the 4 years I did after college. I think entrepreneur is Latin for terrible employee. And but I worked beside somebody who was like, she's like, when I was new, she's like, I'm gonna quit. This place won't know what to do without me. And I'm like, ooh, wow, something's going down. I just started. A year later, she's still in her office. I'm gonna quit this place, and you realize, oh.
That's just
complaining.
It's just complaining.
Yeah.
And so realizing one of the things you can do in a group think when it comes to group pylon, and something, look, it can be cathartic to bond together on that. But if that's all the time, we're not asking people to stop complaining. We're not asking people to do anything. We're just realizing how is it working out for you? And if you want to enjoy it a bit more, at some point during the pylon, you can all say, okay, so what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
That ends it usually. Now, mind you, it might start a side group chat about you.
Right.
You know, who doesn't want to
be trying to rope everybody together
it really,
some big boss.
Yeah, it really pulls it back down into it saying, so what are we going to do about this? And it can really kind of button it together to say, okay, so what are we going to do about this? And it can certainly end it. And I think that sometimes we come in association, you kind of come back as a governing body or the official body for a group, and you come back and you come back and say, you know, this happened, we're sorry you're upset and about this. And like, no, it's very simple. You word it with an intent. You're like, our intent was for this to happen and it did not, and for that we're sorry.
Yeah.
People don't expect us to go to the moon for us. What we want is just accountability. We want to feel like we've been heard, because up to that point of whatever the problem was, we haven't. And when you can come back and just say, hey, you know what? That's on us.
Yeah,
humans are forgiving.
Yeah, it was the first piece of information. There was a really horrible manager I had when I was a checkout girl at a grocery store. And but he gave me some of the best advice ever. He was truly a jackass, probably falls under many different numbers and chapters of Jackass, but he gave me some of the best advice that I've used over and over again. He said, and this was like the first day, he said, you know, you're going to have people who come in and they're going to be screaming, they're going to be mad, you know, they got eggs, maybe they got something, you know, months ago and they're trying to get a refund for it. And he said, 9 times out of 10, if you just let them scream and say what they need to say, they don't even care about the refund. They just want to be heard.
Yeah.
And it's been true. I've used that working with associations. I use that constantly, because most of the time people just want to be heard.
And that's about, it comes back to framing it back on them and their intent. And what they're saying is, listen to me.
Yeah.
And I am patient zero for this stuff. I try to remember this stuff. And we did a promotion for the book when it did launch. We did 2 promotions on the Facebook page. One was, if you're a nurse, put it on your Amazon wish list, we'll buy you the book. And then the second one was for teachers. Mm-hmm. It's 2 professions that are in our family and we love them. And they deal with a lot of jackassery, some of the top fields that deal with jackassery. And then, so what happens was people would add it to their wish list. There was only one instruction: add it to your wish list. And then the other step was make sure it should be able to ship to your house. And so it doesn't give us the address; it gives Amazon the ability to ship it direct to them. And for the most part, you spend on that whole thing was people are not setting up properly to ship. So it all was be adding things to a cart, going to ship, won't allow it, removing it from the cart, going back and telling them this, repeat this process dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And so eventually, things fall through the cracks. And so we had one person, we went to buy it, can't send it, took it out of the cart and told them, hey, you got to change the settings. Then we went on to the next people, because the momentum was going. And then a day or so later, we get a message saying, yeah, I knew this was a fraud. Oh, and of course, I'm like,
no.
all right, it's go, let's go, it's go time. And, hey Chelsea. And, so I went, and I'm thinking of, how is this a scam? They're like, I knew it was a scam. And in my head, I wanted to write, and we choose every interaction is, to go either Dr. Jekyll, Dr. Jackass, or Mr. Hyde, right? Where you decide, am I going to, that's why the book has a suggested Jackass reaction and a suggested Whisper reaction, because you have earned the right to continue the jackassery. Nobody's told you otherwise. But if you don't, you got to flip it. And so in my head, I'm like, what is her intent of this message? Mm-hmm. And I realized she's upset because she's seeing everybody else receive books and she never got one. So, my original thing was, how is this a scam? We're trying to give you stuff. But I'm like, I wrote back and I said, our intent was to make nurses happy, not upset them. And so we're sorry about that. And I assure you the book is, I went back and checked and the book is on the way. And she wrote back, she's like, it's not cool seeing other people get stuff that you were promised. And I'm like, it's okay. And I'm like, I totally get that. Again, I'm sorry. We hope you enjoy the book. And then I just see some dots. And she goes, I'm sorry, I was the jackass this time. And I'm like, oh, it worked.
It worked.
Oh, it worked. And then I literally ran over to Alison. I'm like, look, it worked. And she's like, yeah.
Jackass.
I know. That's what we wrote. To be like, and I'm like, yeah, but I didn't believe it. Like, it actually works. And
but
so it did.
And then I think I said something like, never tell this story to people that you didn't know it was going to work after we'd already written it.
And then I just told it again.
Yes.
In
action. Yes. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, just really quickly, does anyone on here have any questions that they wanted to ask really quickly? Scott and Alison, while we have them on here, I am just absolutely just so grateful to you for taking the time to talk with us today. I just love the podcast. I love what you're doing. I think it's amazing. And I think that the intent behind just the whole way through has been really good, just about being real. Kathy says, loved this book, love Alison. Thanks, and Scott.
Kathy.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of positive things from people who, many of whom are not on this call, but people who were saying, I either saw Scott and I think he's amazing, or I've read all their books, and I just, there's a lot of love out there for you. Since this audience is comprised of primarily association professionals who do hire speakers and do reach out regularly, what are the big topics that really light you up right now that you like to talk about? Because I know that you can talk about a lot, but as of this right now, what's kind of the thing that you're zoned in on?
Well, outside of jackassery, which has been an exciting kind of topic to do, because it opens up kind of new audiences for it too, where so it's like we have the business topics, then we have like the general jackass type of things, but it's almost like the contrarian disruption side of things I'm still enjoying, that's why when we put out the third revision of UnMarketing, we changed the subtitle from UnMarketing, Stop Marketing, Start Engaging to Everything has Changed and Nothing is Different. And because of that, you're seeing all this, because I have my toes dipped in the marketing side of things, the HR world, all these things. You realize like a bunch of us in digital and marketing is like the world is changing and they're all running this way, and then everybody's trying to catch up to it. And my whole thing is let's just slow down for a second and realize that here's some really cool change and stuff, but also we're really resisting a lot of the stuff. And why? And the problem is we keep resisting this way, we're going to be out of a job or out of a company in some industries. And so the disruption side of it, I love, because I love the things changing and I love tech and I love it. But I also love looking at an audience and saying, by the way, you have 95% of the answer already, which is what you're already doing. And we're just, because we're abandoning ways, because the problem is, especially in the older part of the workforce, us that are Gen X and above, it's like, no, we had a deal a couple decades ago. We had a deal that if I did this, if I worked hard, if I went to school, then I'd be rewarded. And when I get to my 40s and my 50s, I'd be towards the executive suite and stuff. And now you're having these jackasses showed up with man buns and hoodies and showing up in their e-scooters trying to tell me that, do I want a hit of their vape? You're like, what is happening here? Why are you my boss? Like, it's so, everything is so in flux.
I think when things are changing really quickly, that it's really important to remind people that the things that make business great are the same. Those haven't actually changed. Creating products that are good, creating quality, services, listening to your customers, having customer service, hiring good employees, trusting, and all of these things. So it hasn't changed. And I think that's one of the big things we've seen is that people are so used to this rapid change that people are just freaking out. And part of what's been really popular for Scott is just saying like, okay, but we agree things are changing. Yes, the hotel industry and travel and blah, blah, blah. But also what makes businesses succeed hasn't changed. And so let's talk about some of the ways that you can survive disruption, or ways that you can find those gaps if you want to be a disruptive company. Like, where should you be looking to figure out how you can attack that? So I think it's kind of a cool time to be speaking.
It's been, it's a blast. It's a nice world to live in. And, I live in my dream every time I hit the stage. So it's very cool.
So one last question. And also Laura said, already sent in my Jackass suggestion. Love this whole idea. Great talk today. So what is, I would love to be a fly on the wall. I feel like when I'm listening to the podcast, it's so fun to hear you two riff off of each other and just talk about stuff. But, what is a subject that maybe you're not putting the book out about it, you're not talking about it yet on stage, but it's something that is really on fire for you right now? Is there anything that is maybe being discussed that you're not, you don't yet have a talk wrapped around?
Yeah. Community is a huge thing for us, and we run a speaker community, about 500 speakers in it, and we've always been fascinated by community. And so, but there's not a huge talk on it. And it's like we would never come out with the book UnNetworking, because it would just be one sentence. It was just, don't be a jackass to people. Like, that would be the whole thing. Like, that's it. And that would be the first and last chapter.
Yeah. And Scott he does a lot of stuff to give back to the speaking community. And I think that, we've played around over the years with writing different things, but that sort of community and giving back to speakers and supporting speakers, I think, is probably what we do that we would never, that we're not anyway currently, that we're not planning on writing a book about, because I think it's important.
The future manifesto, though, the unspeakable, the truth about this, speaking the world. Yeah.
With associations too. Like, it's just about figuring out sort of like, we don't work backwards. So it's not like we're hearing like people want a speaker that do this, wanting this, but us just sort of figuring out what we want to do and growing our communities. And
and one of the things so for me, like on the road, one of the things, like I'm a huge sports freak. So I love, and since I'm on the road, you have to you're so isolated all the time. You're on the road. And so my goal is to hit every ballpark, arena, and stadium in the 4 major sports in North America, and I've done half now. And so like that's like a side quest for me at all these events. Otherwise, it was just a boardroom, a hotel room, and an airport. And so I've done over half now. So it's like that's part. We know that's nothing to do with any of the talks or the topics, and it's just something that's fun. We love music. We have our 2 oldest boys are both going in the music industry and business, and so we're going to NAM in January, which is a big music conference. And so like that stuff we don't bring up much, but it's like those are some cool topics too.
Do either of them play bass guitar by chance?
No.
One's taking guitar lessons, but not
one's
bass.
taking guitar lessons, and my buddy Mitch Joel takes care of all the bass stuff that we know.
Oh, that's right. Well, okay, so Mitch Joel I was going to bring up a good friend of mine, Corey Brown, who I interviewed on here. He has No Treble, which is the community for bass players, always goes to NAM, always talks about NAM. But Mitch Joel writes with him on No Treble. So small world. Yeah. Cool.
It's very cool.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm so thankful you did that. This is kind of a unique sort of thing, a little different than the podcast, but something that I wanted to offer to the people, the Patreon patrons who support the book club, as an opportunity for them to talk with the authors of our book of the month. And for the people who are going to be listening to this later, this is hopefully encouraging them to become a Patreon patron, but also just pick up the book. I didn't even get to flip to all of my different markings in the book to talk about all the different types of jackasses. But there really is just an incredible, it's so much fun. That's why I wanted to choose this book for December. And just giving everyone a chance to let off a little steam and maybe build a little empathy as they go into the holidays. And we're all talking and working with all kinds of different people that, can be a little bit.
It's a stressful time. People are stressed about things that haven't even happened yet. They just know they're going to happen and they're stressed about them already.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Thank you guys all for reading too.
Yeah,
and thank you
I'm
so
glad you guys
much.
picked the book. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.